for body corporates and community management. With me, as per always, Frank Higginson, partner at Hines. Frank, welcome.
Hello, Chris. Hello, everyone, yet again. I suppose this is a dryish topic, but it's a necessary one because I think hopefully there'll be some things in this for everyone that you might not have otherwise known.
It's actually, yeah, it's a pretty important one because we're talking about one of the fundamentals of being in a body corporate today. So before we get into that, by all means, chuck us some questions live and we'll try and answer as many of those as we can. If your question's a bit more involved, best to use the link to the form that we're just about to put there in chat now. That way you can shoot us a question and we will get back to you as soon as possible afterwards. But this week, we love our series, we love our sequels, we love our parts, and so this week it's the first in the all singing, all dancing CMS series. So as we say, it's going to be a series, and today we're looking particularly at the CMS in relation to lot entitlements, to further developments, to amalgamations and subdivisions. And I reckon next time, Frank, will be looking at the CMS in relation to the bylaw review process.
Absolutely, which is we do a lot of all of this, so it's interesting sort of just the wrapping it all up in the one conversation. And I think we're probably getting a little bit more disciplined in terms of rather than getting to 228 and realizing, hang on a minute, we've got another webinar's worth of content. We're getting more structured now to say here's part A, part B, part C. So yeah, the front part of the CMS is what we're dealing with today.
Now, while we're talking about such things, we do a stack of CMS reviews for bylaws, don't we, Frank?
We do.
So we're just putting up there a link that you can use to actually, this is pretty nifty, you can actually upload your CMS. We can come back to you about it, can't we?
And we will give you an obligation-free proposal. And in that, we'll point out some of the invalid bylaws you've got. And I suppose more importantly, some of the bylaws that you should have that aren't there.
Yep.
And even had a client this week where they've got a particular issue and it's sort of, they've given me the CMS. Again, this isn't today's topic, but give me the CMS and the issue they want addressed isn't dealt with their CMS for certain reasons. So we're giving you a proposal review your bylaws. Yeah, you did 3 years ago, and it pointed out the exact things that now they can't do because if they'd done it, they would have been able to deal with it.
Yep. Same old story, that one.
And now they're doing their bylaws.
Okay. Well, at least it's come around, I suppose. 3 years, but at least it's happening. Anyway, CMS. Look, for such a fundamental thing, it is frequently misunderstood, we find. First of all, it often gets confused with a CTS. And there's been more than one occasion that I can think of where we've mentioned the CMS and there's been a glazed blank look in response, which is never good. So anyway, it's a scary thing because pretty much everything that happens in your body corporate all comes back to the CMS. Gosh, even I'm having trouble with it now. Look, I guess what we're trying to say here, Frank, aren't we, is that you don't need to know clause 4, line 3, schedule A, part B says blah. You need to know the basics though, don't you?
Like all these things. And this is, again, mate, back to why we're doing these things, is to sort of help educate people about the basics of strata title, because this is a very, you call it basic, but it's also fundamental because every single body corporate in Queensland has one of these things. And it is the core of their legal existence, which we'll get to in a minute. And a lot of people don't know it exists. And that's the danger, I suppose, of volunteerism, in a sense, of putting your hand up to get on a committee without any training. And not that we're advocating formal training or the rest of it, but helping people understand what it is that governs their day-to-day body corporate life outside the legislation is pretty important.
Damn right. The most basic thing of all, CMS means Community Management Statement. Okay. And look, of those 3 words, Frank, I reckon statement is probably the big part, because what a statement usually means is it's a defined, structured, articulated document which spells out a position. And that's precisely what the CMS does. It spells out the position of your body corporate. Let's whiz through some CMS 101 before we get into some of the detail that we talked about earlier. So CMS 101, everyone. So it's lodged, Frank, isn't it, by the developer, and it basically gives birth to the scheme.
It does. So when it's lodged at the moment, the developer, there's a parcel of land that's in just one name, lot one on SP, whatever, and the survey plan that's lodged with the CMS then creates the separate titles that are the community title lots that form that body corporate. So when that's registered, you go from one lot into 60 or 2 or 12 or whatever it might be.
Yep. So it's lodged with the titles office, as we said. The version which is lodged with the titles office is the right version. That's the one that counts. So any others which are floating around or which are purportedly the CMS, doesn't really matter. If it's the one registered with the titles office, that's it. And so what that means for you, whether you're a committee member, whether you're an owner, anyone for that matter, if you want to know what the CMS is for a particular body corporate, you can go to the titles office, Frank, can't you? Search and obtain it.
Yep. Or ideally, your body corporate manager or your Strata management portal via their software supplier should have a copy of it. But it is that there's one registered copy, and that's it. So a photocopy outside that is meaningless in a sense.
So just put up there a link to the titles office to contact them. If you are feeling a bit CMS nerdy, you can even go a step further and look at the Land Title Practice Manual, which gives you the minutiae of what the CMS is meant to contain. And look, for the hell of it, we'll put up the link to that one as well for a bit of light reading.
Yeah, when you want to put yourself to sleep at night, go for it.
Yeah. Look, but ideally, you'd have your CMS when you purchase the lot. So that you'd have that as part of your essential paperwork. Here's an interesting tip, Frank. A CMS never actually gets amended, does it?
No. So unless you're in a BUGTA scheme, and I'll leave those out, the old school way to do bylaws was original set of bylaws registered 1 to 40, and then 2 years later they delete bylaw 40 and add bylaw 40, new bylaw 40 through to 42, and then delete 37A and whatever. And so that chain of registered documents you had to put together to see what the bylaws were. In anyone other than BUGTA, so BCCM, that one document is it. So if you do take out bylaw 40 and put a new bylaw 40, you register a whole new document, and there it is. There's your Bible.
Excellent. Which leads us to, well, what does the CMS actually contain? It's comprised of schedules, isn't it, Frank?
Yeah, A, B, C, D, E, interestingly enough. Very simple.
Give us the A to E, Frank.
A to E. So I suppose the starting point is we identify all of the real estate that's included in that body corporate. So lot 1 through to 40 on SP, whatever, as lots get potentially subdivided or amalgamated, they might have new plans. There might be a balanced development lots. We'll talk about that. So if you're in a high rise, there's hardly likely to be any further development. If you're in a flatland or townhouse estate, what can happen is rather than the developer build all 60 of the potential lots at one time, they might bite them off and do them in bite-sized chunks of 15 and a hit. So the first CMS for that body corporate might have the first 15 lots, and then there'll be a balanced development lot, which will be the 16th one, out of which the other 45 lots will appear over time. And we're talking about Schedule B. So, but Schedule A lays that out. Lot on plan, county and parish still, title reference and that sort of stuff. So your lot is part of that. And that means then that the CMS is recorded on the title to your lot. So if you're not sure how to find it, if you can search a registered dealing via Chris's link before, the title to your lot will have the CMS registered against it, same as a mortgage. If you're in the fortunate position of owing money to banks with security over your real estate.
Yep.
Second part of that is Schedule B. Schedule B is not going to apply to all bodies corporate. It only applies to bodies corporate where there's further staging. So, and that is part of the CMS that explains what can happen and what may happen and what will happen with those further development lots as time goes on. So it'll deal with entitlements, it'll deal with the number of lots that might be created, it might deal with taking out or adding common property from the scheme. It can really be almost as flexible as the developer can create it, because the issue from a development perspective is that once a body corporate comes into existence, there's limited ways to change a CMS. So ordinarily, to change bylaws, it's a special resolution. 2/3 in favour, 2 out of every 3 people who voted in favour, and a couple of other little things. If a further development, I suppose I'll save Schedule B, but Schedule B, you talk about further staging. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in detail. Schedule C is all of the bylaws. Pretty simple. So we'll cover that in part 2 of this series in terms of what they are. But that's really where most people probably spend their time. Of course, back to one of the core parts of a CMS, it identifies which regulation module the body corporate's regulated by: accommodation, standard, commercial, small schemes, 2-lot, those things. Schedule D is where architectural codes hide. So that, again, you won't see in a high-rise estate, but you may well see in townhouse or flatland estates, and particularly newer ones where people buy the land and then can potentially build their own homes and can renovate their homes over time. And there wants to be, or the developer wants to ensure that there's some consistency in terms of what those renovations or new homes look like. And that might be as simple as talking about roof colorings. It might talk about roof types, color bond tiles. You can't have tiles, you can have color bond. And those things are actually binding, which bylaws can't do, but an architectural code can. And then last but not least is Schedule E, which is all the exclusive use allocations. So what will happen is a bylaw will say that the owners of the lots identified in Schedule E have the exclusive use of the spaces allocated to them in Schedule E. And then you go into Schedule E and you'll see Lot 1, you'll have car space number 1, and then there'll be a plan with that shows where car space number 1 actually is. And that is probably 100% of CMSs. Most have exclusive use allocations of some kind. Yep. Very few have Schedule Ds. Everyone has Schedule C. Everyone's got entitlements. Everyone's got a module. So it's a CMS in a nutshell. But I suppose then, Chris, leads us to entitlements, doesn't it?
Let's rip into entitlements, Frank. Hot button topic always, entitlements. Frank, what's the lowdown?
Where do we start? So, I feel like I'm in Wayne's World, they go back in history. I need the so before BCCM in 1997, we used to have BUGTA, Building Use and Group Titles Act. And that, interestingly enough, had only one schedule of entitlements. So we'll get to why BCCM's got 2. And what that legislation said was that where lots were in group title or standard format plan, so effectively land subdivision, the entitlement should be proportionate to the value of the lot compared to all of the other lots. So if all of the lots were, $100,000, everyone's got an equal proportion entitlement in the body corporate expenses. But for building format plans, which is high rises, there was no such indication. People could do what they wanted. So lots of people went with the valuation methodology, as much as that wasn't required. Some went with equals and whatever it might be. But what the issue then became is when BCCM arrived in 1997, the government, again, and it makes sense now, and this is always the issue in terms of retrospectively changing what the rules have been, is that there's 2 schedules of entitlements. We've got a contribution schedule and we've got an interest schedule. And they are 2 different things. So the contribution schedule determines everyone's proportionate share of their contribution towards the body corporate's operating costs. And the interest schedule is effectively your proportionate share. The best way to look at it is that's what that methodology was from a group title perspective. That's your proportionate, the value of your lot compared to all of the other lots.
Yeah.
So we weren't then using valuation as the way to calculate how people contributed towards the body corporate expenses. But what happened with BCCM when it arrived is all of those entitlements just transferred across cold. So we had then, I think from 2003, statement in the Act that said that basically unless there were just and equitable reasons for them not to be equal, all contribution schedule entitlements should be equal. So everyone should have equal entitlements. So from 2003 to 2011, it was a bit of free-for-all in terms of contribution schedule lot entitlement adjustments, particularly where people came across, in high-rise schemes, this was really prevalent. The penthouse might carry an entitlement of 10, and the ground floor one-bedder might carry an entitlement of 1, a contribution schedule. So while from an interest side of things, 10 to 1 might represent $1 million versus 100 grand on the ground floor, it didn't necessarily, in accordance with the Act, represent the proportionate share that those two lots should be carrying of the body corporate's expenses. So there was a free-for-all in terms of lot entitlement contribution reports and apportioning what costs should go where, and getting away from 10 and 1 and maybe having 56 and 47 as being the amounts and all this sort of stuff, until the media, I suppose, got hold of it, Chris, being a little bit cynical, and the door got slammed shut in 2011 to those things. So, Chris, there's a bunch of content, I suppose, we should link up there. So what we'll put up, this was almost the first thing that came out as part of the LNP review. So what was this, 2011? No, yep. 2013 or thereabouts. One of the very first things that came out from a strata title perspective was adjustment of contribution schedule lot entitlements in a discussion paper from QUT. So we'll put that up, and we'll also put up a link to the article we wrote at the time when basically the government decided it got way too hard and they weren't going to allow any more entitlements, because the reality is, when it comes to entitlement adjustments, for every winner, there's a loser.
Yeah.
Because the body corporate's expenses are still 100 grand a year. All entitlements do is decide who bears what portion of those. So if someone goes down, someone else goes up. So very, very messy. So where entitlements are now is basically you're stuck with what you've got, unless there's a very, very, I think, substantial change to the community title scheme, which justifies a change, and it's really hard to do that. So you still can change entitlements, but it requires a resolution without dissent. So for that to happen, either people have got to be asleep at the wheel in terms of not voting against something that might affect them, or they've got to be relatively altruistic. And we've got one of these at the moment, actually up in North Queensland, where a lot owner who actually has the better side of the coin is saying, you know what, I don't think it's fair that I pay less than everyone else, so I'm happy to pay more.
Really?
It is possible. So, that's
cray-cray.
It is. I'm a bit surprised, honestly, because when the body corporate manager rang me and said, this is what we want to do, I said, you sure you've got support? I said, yeah, this is the position. I said, okay. So it does happen. So contribution schedule entitlements are usually that first column, proportionate share of expenses. And the other thing they're used for is poll voting. So am I sick of talking? You want to talk about poll voting, Chris?
No, you keep going. You're doing
keep going. Do it on a roll. So poll voting is when you do a vote based on entitlements as opposed to number of lots. So you wouldn't quite call it gerrymander. But when you come to a normal body corporate, again, simple example, we've got 10 lots. Everyone has one vote. So if Chris owned 3 lots in that body corporate, he would have 3 votes because he's got 3 lots at that general meeting. If I own 1, I've got 1 vote. On an ordinary resolution basis that isn't secret ballot, if someone calls for a poll, what that means is that particular decision is going to be decided on contribution schedule lot entitlement aggregates, not voting numbers, not number of votes. So that's where effectively your increased contribution to the body corporate expenses, in a sense, give you an increased right to have a say. So back to that example before, if Chris owns 3 lots and he's voted in favour, and I vote 1 lot and I vote against, but it turns out Chris's lots only have an entitlement of 1 each and I'm carrying 4, and I call for a poll, that means that my 4 contribution schedule lot entitlements knock off Chris's 3.
Yep.
So there's a BCCM example that we might put up that's on their website that's really good, that explains that. Little known fact, poll voting, so you can't use it on a secret ballot because there's no way then to tell what the contribution schedule entitlements are. And it's only applicable to ordinary resolution. And you can call it after you've already seen the votes. So we might see Chris 3-1. At that stage, I say, you know what, Mr. Chairperson or Madam Chairperson, I'd like this decided on a poll, please. Let's go.
Happens a fair bit, doesn't it?
But not many people know about it. It's really interesting. And then on the other side of the coin, the interest schedule lot entitlements, again, best way to probably describe that from my perspective is if the scheme blew up tomorrow, everyone's got that proportionate share of what's left of the common property as a site value. And also, from a government perspective, it's used for rates calculations from a site value. And if you've got land tax, if you're on a big block of land with not many units, there might be some land tax consequences also apportioned based on that, because that's really your ownership stake in the land. So what we got with BCCM is we split out contribution towards operating costs and relevant interests based on ownership. And I suppose the easiest example to use is how body corporate managers charge. Body corporate managers will usually charge a dollar value per lot per annum. So let's plug a figure, say $100 per lot per annum to do the administrative and plus PP&S and whatever it might be. But their costs for providing their services to the body corporate are on a per lot basis. So if Chris owns the 1 better and I own the penthouse, we'll do it that way, mate. I'll be the rooster and you can be the feather duster for this one. The body corporate manager's costs to service our needs of a body corporate aren't related to the differential value of the ownership of our lots. They're related to the fact that we each own a lot. So why should I pay 10 times the amount Chris does, leaving ideology aside, towards those actual costs? And that's the rationale for it. You can get into lifts and pools and bedrooms and outdoor painting and all sorts of stuff, but that's where it came from. So it's very static at the moment, but that schedule is a really, really important thing. And I think, Chris, it's fair to say in terms of the Community Title Scheme Working Group at the moment, one of the things that's definitely on the agenda is disclosure for people that are buying lots in community title schemes in terms of should there be more, what should it look like? And one of the conversation pieces that disappeared with the red tape reduction, again, when Campbell arrived in 2011, I can't believe that's a decade ago, CMSs used to be disclosed as part of a disclosure statement when people were buying community title lots. That was then removed to take away all the photocopying. And now we're absolutely discussing whether that might come back into existence again.
Yep.
So, the more things change, the more they stay the same. But that shows how important it is from a disclosure perspective to draw people's attention to the fact of what they're buying into.
We want to quickly touch upon, Frank, further developments.
Yeah, this is Schedule B. So I sort of slid into it a tiny bit before, but I'll close it out here. The simple version is, again, to change a CMS or to lodge a new CMS normally requires ordinary resolution or special resolution general meeting to change bylaws. A committee can sign a new CMS and give effect to a new CMS in very limited circumstances. And one of those is when further developments being given effect in accordance with Schedule B. So again, we're back to that 15 lot of 60 stage subdivision we were talking about before. When that second stage of 15 lots comes to the stage of where it's actually built and ready to be registered and got a certificate of practical completion, all that sort of stuff from council, provided that what the developer's done is consistent with what was disclosed in that Schedule B, the committee can sign that CMS to allow the creation of those further 15 lots. So from a committee perspective, and there's a little bit of work in this for us from time to time, particularly when there's some difference of opinion about whether what the developer's asking the committee to sign is consistent with what's in the CMS as disclosed in Schedule B, because if it's not, the committee can't sign that.
Yeah. No.
So it's really important to make sure that's right. And sometimes those things do go wrong, because otherwise, the only way then you're going to subdivide lots and the rest of it is potentially through general meeting.
Funny you should talk about subdividing, because that's what we're just going to quickly touch upon next. So the whole issue of amalgamations and subdivisions. So it's actually pretty common, not always, but reasonably common.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that you'll have a desire to amalgamate 2 or more lots, usually it's 2, into one. And then it's also reasonably common on the flip side of that to have one lot and subdivide it into maybe 2, 3. And so that obviously needs to be taken, or rather the other way around, the CMS will have to be adjusted to reflect if that's the case, won't it?
Because we're back to what it includes. It includes the common property. So if you're subdividing or amalgamating a lot, subdivision, of course, you're creating another lot. And if you're amalgamating, you're getting 2 lots into one. So the CMS needs to reflect those. And I think for me, This probably the tricky thing that some people were doing very early in the piece was they'd amalgamate a lot when you could, and then what they'd do is they'd swallow up the entitlements from both of those lots, so interest and contribution. So the interest schedule in theory shouldn't change because the market value of the lot is bigger than what the previous single one was. But if you go to that example of 10 lots and everyone's got an entitlement of 1, if you put 2 lots together, you've then got a contribution schedule lot entitlement of 2. And then if you go back to where we were pre-2011, where entitlements should be equal unless there's just and equitable reasons for them not to be, they'd go and make the application to the body corporate to say, hang on a minute, I've got 2 entitlements, I should only have 1, I want to go back to 1, and they'd get away with it. So what also happened in 2011 when they slammed the door on entitlement adjustments is they said that an amalgamated lot is going to assume responsibility for what the previous contribution schedule entitlements were. So bigger lot is going to represent a bigger portion of the expenses. So, and for me, I think the thing that confuses people here a lot, and that's a really often, confuses people often as opposed to a lot, we don't need to talk about lots too much, is that there's 2 separate things that can go on with an amalgamation or a subdivision. The first is actually the legal amalgamation or subdivision. So taking lots 1 and 2 and making them one legal new lot that is still then potentially separated by walls and doors and has 2 kitchens and 4 bedrooms and all that sort of stuff, because that in itself is almost impossible for a committee to get in the way of, because it's not actually changing what is physically there already. Where a committee really gets involved is when the lot owner wants to do works to that newly amalgamated lot to take out walls and kitchens and interfere with plumbing and all that sort of stuff. And that's when a committee, particularly in relation to your bylaws, if they're right in renovations, get involved. So there are 2 things, the legal amalgamation and then the works to the amalgamated lot are really important things to differentiate.
Yeah, good point, Frank. I imagine there might be a few people watching this today who pick up on that point. And yeah, don't forget, use that link that we used at the start there for queries around that one. As we always like to do, in the short time we've got left, we always like to give a bit of best practice and say, what are our best practice takeaways in this CMS discussion today? I think the first one here, Frank, don't be afraid of the CMS and its complexities. Okay, there's a bit to get your head around, fair enough. Once you start to break it down though, like you did, you've done primarily today, Frank, it actually starts to take on a logical life of its own. A, B, C, D. It's this, it's this, it's this. Takes on a logical perspective. The second takeaway today, always make sure you have the right version of it. We talk about this all the time in relation to bylaws. Well, CMS contains the bylaws. So you better make sure you've got the right CMS. Don't rely upon somebody saying to you, yeah, sure, that's the right CMS. Make sure it is correct.
And mate, what I'd say with that is quite often clients send us through a Schedule C, which is the bylaw bit, without the rest of it. And that always makes me skittish, because that set of bylaws could have been copied from any CMS that's out there, not necessarily the one that applies to their building. So it's like, guys, have you got the whole thing rather than just that bit of it?
Yep, absolutely. Probably the third best practice takeout today is to, if you can, start getting into the habit of referring to the CMS when you need to establish some facts or benchmarks about the scheme. So if you've got a dispute, or not even a dispute, a disagreement or a misunderstanding about something going on at your body corporate, start getting into the habit of referring to where that particular issue is referred to in the CMS. So, okay, I've got some issues around bylaws. Well, the CMS in the schedule says this. It's this bylaw. It's this thing. It's not what somebody down the road told you or thought that they read on Facebook. It's actually what it says in the CMS. I think there are big, and one of the, probably the other one we should mention here, if in doubt, seek advice about your CMS. Always. Don't make assumptions about it. Big mistake. We've come more or less to the end of our first CMS journey today. I think that went pretty well. So yeah, stay tuned for the second in the CMS series. But next week, Frank, we get to represent. So next week,
under the new regime.
Yeah. So next week, it's all about representation in its various forms: proxies, powers of attorney, representatives, nominees. We're going to go over the main parts of all of that. There's a fair bit of content there, so I'm not sure.
There's a lot, and it's still, we get a lot of inquiry. Yeah, mate, it's a great topic, that one, because we do get a lot of constant queries on those.
So that'll be a good one next week. Stay tuned for that one. In the meantime, though, Frank, thank you, as always.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. As always, much appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.